recording and welcome you to KEPServerEX version 6.3 release webinar. So our third release of our new version 6 software. I'm Joanne Backrack, the Training Delivery Manager for PTC and the Kepware group. So I am recording this, and you will receive an email of the recording with a PDF of the slides and a link to the webinar within a few days of this broadcast. Anybody who registers for these webinars gets that. We'll also post a recording on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. And if you want information on upcoming webinars, you can always go to our training page on our website. So today we have a pretty light agenda. We introduced a new driver in KEPServerEX version 6.3 for Keyence KV. We have some new time sync functionality for what's called our electronic flow measurement drivers, which are specific to oil and gas. So those are kind of two specific markets that we're going to address and speak to. I'm going to touch lightly on those because they're not maybe as broad of an appeal as the other two items we'll discuss, which are our configuration API, which I'll explain briefly if you haven't heard of that before. We introduced that with version 6, and our Thingworks integration enhancements. Okay, great. Oh, and just FYI, that questions pane you can type into at any point if you have a question. And we'll do our best to answer your questions as we go through the presentation, as well as have a Q&A break at the end. All right, Keyence KV Ethernet. So Keyence, the company, is headquartered in Japan, and they manufacture sensors, scales, barcode scanners, PLCs. So kind of your typical hardware vendor in the automation manufacturing space. Obviously, their biggest markets would be Japan and U.S. locations of Japan-based companies. So you might have seen them if you're working with Japanese companies. And key applications are very common to what you would see in any PLC manufacturer: traceability, monitoring, control, plant-wide automation, and also specifically for Keyence, we see them as a backup to larger brands such as Mitsubishi that also have a large presence in the Japanese and Asian markets. So Keyence KV supports the KV series PLCs, which includes 5,000, 3,000, 7,000, and the Nano. Previously, you could use our Mitsubishi driver to connect to the Keyence KV series, but that was unsupported. So now we just officially support it, and we have plenty of support for the different data types in those PLCs. We have read blocking, which is a common feature for many of our drivers for getting high throughput, and it is localized in the Japanese language. So when you install the software for Keyence, you do have the option to switch over to the Japanese language for that. And it's part of our manufacturing suite, which is one of our most popular suites that features all of our standard drivers. All right, so we have some new time sync functionality for drivers with our electronic flow measurement capabilities. So we have something called the Electronic Flow Measurement Exporter, which is an advanced plugin. And electronic flow measurement is used for tracking in the oil and gas industry, so for accounting for the amount of product that's going through big pipelines in this industry. And it's used with specific drivers. They're listed up on the screen there, 5 of them: ABB, Enron, Fisher-Rock, OmniFlow. And the biggest markets, again, are oil and gas, water, wastewater. So if you want to learn more specifically about this, if it's relevant to you, you can go to our website. There's a little link at the bottom of the page there. So the main improvement here is that since we're working with these flow meters, which are remote out in the field, out on a pipeline, then you may need to get some significant time drift. So you may need to sync, if you have the monitoring SCADA system at headquarters, you may need to sync that with a device out in the field. So we check to see if the time's matching, and if not, sync it. So previously there were only a couple options for doing this time sync. Absolute, so once a day or on a specified interval. And the people who are using our oil and gas solution, our oil and gas customers, realize that these weren't necessarily ideal options, because this was incurring a higher cost, and also meant that it was causing more network traffic than necessary. So now we have a couple options where we can set a time sync threshold. So set an allowable deviation. So let's say it's 2 minutes. It's 2 minutes out of sync, then we'll sync the time. Or if we're already going out to that device to make a poll anyway to get data, just do the time sync and kind of do two things at once there and maximize our communication options with the device. So again, both of those were very specific to specific markets. You can always visit our website, and we have many videos and tutorials up on YouTube for both EFM and for Kion. So if you go to our website, there's a ton of documentation up there if you want to learn more. So now let's get on to configuration API enhancements. And let's see what this is kind of more relevant to pretty much everybody on the line. So let's briefly talk about what the configuration API is, if you haven't heard of it before. So the idea of the API is this again, released in version 6, so a major improvement over our V5 product. And the idea is, instead of having to be on the local machine to be able to configure the Kepware project through what we call our thick UI or our GUI, you can use a custom web client that you've programmed to actually make project changes, add channel device tags, modify data types or import tags, and so on and so forth. So you don't have to actually be logged on to that local machine to make changes, and you can do it from any connected web client. It has built-in security. Obviously, when you're doing these remote project changes, security is top of mind, so lots of security options there. And then also transaction logging, which means that any changes that you make to your project, you can log and see what those changes are. So it's kind of like a record of how your project's been evolving. So through web page, if you've programmed this web page, and we do have example code up on our website and a little 10-minute video I'll talk about in a second, that shows you how to use the configuration API. So if you're connected through a web client to the machine that has the Kepware install, you have access to create channel device tag connectivity using all our drivers, and you can also configure some of our advanced plugins like the scheduler, IoT gateway, EFM exporter. You can read our event log remotely, and you can also modify project properties. So we've just enhanced this configuration API functionality. We can do full projects load and save. So previously we were only able to do single object, what we call CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. So you could create a single channel, and then you could create a single device under that, and then you create a tag under that. And if you wanted to create a large amount of channel devices and tags, you would have to do these one-by-one transactions to do that. So now we've just improved that functionality where if you, let's say you have a templated project that you're going to replicate across, that you want to replicate across multiple sites, then what you can do is push out that full project, load it in, and save it off. And you can also do multiple objects in a single transaction. We also allow triggering automatic tag generation now. For those of you who don't know what automatic tag generation is, what that is where we query for specific drivers. It's only supported in specific drivers, so it does depend on what driver you're using. So for example, our Backnet Driver supports it. So that's where you have our Backnet Driver, you have that's running on KEPServerEX. you have a controller out on your network, and the Kepware driver simply queries that controller and says, hey, give me the information that I want to be able to read data from you, and it generates the tags automatically for you. So previous to this release, you can trigger that from the configuration API. Now you can. So like I said, we do have a very quick 10-minute video on setting up the configuration API, step-by-step instructions for using it, some really great example code up on the website that shows you how to leverage it, and it's a really nice option if you do want to, if you have multiple installs of KEPServerEX that you want to manage remotely and configure remotely. So let's get into a quick demonstration of this functionality. So I'm going to use, to demo this, I'm going to use something called Postman. This is a little extension you can install in your Chrome browser, and what it allows you to do is interact. The configuration API is a RESTful API, which means it uses the RESTful architecture and specifically HTTP commands. And if what I'm talking about is unfamiliar to you, it's simply the same exact type of interface that's used on the internet. So web clients and web servers use RESTful APIs and these HTTP commands. So what we do is we can target specific endpoints here and do a get, an HTTP command get, and where there's this new endpoint in v6.3 called services that will, and if I query that using a get command, I can see now I have these project load and project save services at my disposal. So if we do a project save, I'm just going to show you my file hierarchy here that I have. I'm in the KEPServerEX application data program data folder. And so I'm going to actually create a folder in that target file system there called test, and save off my current project here, which is just blank, my current Kepware project here, which is in the background. Save that off as test.opf. So you see that that folder and that file does not currently exist here. But if I target this project save endpoint and enter this JSON data, the way we transfer data back and forth is using the JSON format, send that information, it's going to go ahead, tell me, okay, we accepted that, we've done that service for you, created the folder for me, and saved off my OPF. So just a way for me to save off project files remotely. So like if this Postman project was on a remote machine, I could do that without having to be actually logged in and having to go file save here. So basically replacing that functionality. Replicating that functionality. Great. So now we're going to do a project load. Notice that in my headers here and in my authorization, I am sending down authorization, and this is just using the administration account to access the config. So that's part of the security. So just want to point that out real quick. So now I'm going to do a project load, and you notice that I can load a project from any file path I have here. So if this wasn't the C drive, if this was a remote drive or a network drive, I could load it in from there. So from anywhere that's connected on this computer. So here I just have this demo folder in my root project data folder here, program data folder here called load demo, and that's what I'm going to tell Kepware to load in here. So you notice in my Kepware project currently I have no channels and devices configured. So if I send this command to project load telling it to load this OPF, it says accepted. It's going to take a second to load that in my configuration here. But there it goes. It says runtime project replaced. So that's great. Just making sure that worked. Okay, there we go. Just took a second. So here I have an Allen Bradley controller that I've connected, as well as a few other simulator channels that were in this project. So the last thing I want to show you, this Allen Bradley controller has a bunch of tags and tag groups in it. So these were all automatically generated from the controller itself. And the interesting part here is that Allen Bradley does support what we call automatic tag generation directly from the device. So I have this Allen Bradley device connected to my computer. This is actually sitting in our device lab here in our office in Portland, Maine. And since I'm connected to that network, I can query that device and get the data back. So I could do that manually through the device property editor here. If I went into tag generation and clicked this button, I could generate those program tags. Or again, new in v6.3, I can target my Allen Bradley controller that I have set up, my channel, as long as I have the right name set up in here, and target this tag generation endpoint. So I don't have anything in the body. All I need to do to trigger that service is target the specific channel and device that I want and that service for tag generation. So if I send that, it says, okay, it's accepted. And it's going to take a while because it has quite a large project on there. But you see here, I get messages that say, okay, retrieving controller project, and it gives me details of the device I'm connecting to. So IP address, firmware revision, serial number, and so on. So I know that I'm connected and that I'm generating tags. And then you see here, it's completing. So I get 100, almost 200,000 tags back here, and you see that program came through. So that was all triggered by sending that via this RESTful interface using the config API instead of, again, having to get into device properties and interact with my UI here, my config here. All right, so that's it for the demo for the config API. It looks like we have a couple questions on that. First of all, people are noting that the sound is a little laggy, and I apologize for that. It's the internet connection here isn't great today. So thank you for being patient with that. I'm trying to make sure that we deal with that as it happens. Second of all, from Maximo asking, is it basically a save as using that save project? And that's correct, it's a save as. And the name that you give it is the information that you enter in that JSON body that you're sending down to the server. So whatever information you put in the body here, that's how that OPF will be saved. And it doesn't continue working with the original name. It will load the whatever, if you do the project load, it loads whatever new project in there using the new name and the new project that you wanted to target. Okay, great questions. And that actually fits really well into our Thingworks discussion because our configuration API uses the RESTful service, and our connection with Thingworks, which is a IoT platform that is also produced and sold by our parent company, PTC. We're very tightly integrated with them, and that's using what's called Always On, which is also an open standard for connection. And very similar to what we just saw with the configuration API over the RESTful interface, now Thingworks and the KEPServer connection supports the remote project load, remote project changing basically that you saw, but now through the Thingworks connection, through the Always On connection. And it's actually using something like a file transfer protocol to do that. So for people that are configuring with Thingworks, and again, there's tons of info about Thingworks. You can just go search Thingworks on Google or go to thingworks.com. And it's a really cool platform for IoT projects, and we've done a lot of demos with Thingworks before. But now basically, if you have multiple Kepware instances, industrial connectivity instances you're managing from your Thingworks platform, you can manage those all central to Thingworks. And the nice thing here with Thingworks is that the UI and everything, as opposed to the configuration API where you would have to develop the UI and the web client yourself, with Thingworks, it's already been developed for you. So it's, if you don't want to necessarily do that development from scratch, Thingworks is an option. So we have new services that correspond to being able to push projects remotely to the edge. So We have a push config to edge. Obviously, you can cancel that push, and then some status message properties that you can get now. Obviously, again, security is a concern here, so we have certificates and other security options that you can use with these Thingworks connections. One note here is that in the configuration API, you can change project properties. In Thingworks, when you update a project, it ignores project property updates, and that is because, as you see in this window here in the property editor for project properties, the Thingworks connection is defined in project properties. So in order so that users don't accidentally disable their connection when they push a new project, we just ignore those project properties for now. So that's the implementation right now. That might change in order to allow people to modify other project properties without writing over the Thingworks property, but that's how it works for now. Okay, so let me do a demonstration of this briefly. Now I have a virtual machine here that is running Thingworks. And a beautiful beach on my sign-in page. Okay, so here I have an industrial connection to what I've called KEPServerEX main host. And if I minimize my VM, you'll see that that's actually, I'm going to open up my project here that has my Thingworks connectivity. And that's actually on my main host. So this is my host machine. And if I get into project properties, I just double click on the project root here, Thingworks, you see I'm targeting a remote IP, which is my VM, via port 80, that port is configurable, and that thing name. And you see I get a message here that I'm connected to that object in my VM. So I'm going to open up my VM again. And I have this main host connection, so I can browse through tags available on that Kepware system on my main host, and so on and so forth. Now, discover binding tags, you know, doing subscriptions, so on and so forth. This is covered in other webinars and other releases that we've done, but the new feature for this release is this new configuration file option. So this is where I can actually, let's log in. It's a funky password, so I have to copy and paste it. Okay, so this is where I can actually import files. And again, this is done all automatically. So instead of having to use a service like Postman or write my own web client to do this functionality, I'm able to do it from here. So I'm going to load in this remote file. There we go, import. And then I'm going to click on, hover over this little double arrow here, and I'm going to push that to my main host. So if I say yes, I want to push remote load to my host, that'll actually push from my VM to my main host machine and load that new file in. Now it's giving me a problem, which is Murphy's Law of demos that. Okay, so it timed out. Ideally, what would happen is I'd be able to push that project out, but again, works very similarly to how you would expect, to how we saw the configuration API work. It can also do JSON. So if you're saving off your project files in that JSON format, which is nice because it's editable. So as opposed to having to use the OPF format, which is a binary file, and if you open that in some type of editor, it would just look like jargon. It would just look like nonsense. If I load this into an editor, like a JSON editor, I can actually edit the project using JSON. So if I import this, I can import that. But in this particular case, this JSON was formatted incorrectly, so if I tried to push this to the edge, it would not work. Let me see if I can't get this. Working. In the meantime, it does look like we have a couple of questions. So from Michael, is this Thingworks mashup you are showing provided as an extension to load into Thingworks, or is this something we need to create? So Michael, that is not something you need to create. What I'm showing you here in Thingworks, let me just say yes here, is included with this industrial gateway object that you can create. So if you go into our browse here in Thingworks, and just for background for everybody, you can do things like create things, which are a type of entity that just defines maybe an asset you have out on the floor. So maybe it defines a conveyor belt and all the metrics surrounding that conveyor belt, or a pump, or even a PLC itself. So you can create that, but then we have this new option in Thingworks as of Thingworks 8.0 called industrial connections. So what you can do is connect out to OPC servers, and specifically, obviously, very tightly integrated with the KEPServerEX platform. So if I go into industrial connections, you see industrial connections. You see I have two Kepware systems connected, one going to my main host, which is remote to this VM, and one that's actually connected to my local VM that's on this machine, the same one as the as Thingworks. So if I click on one of these objects or entities, this is when I can go in here and get all different type of options for using the data coming in from KEPServerEX. So I have the Discover UI, where I can discover items coming from KEPServerEX and so on. So for some reason, let's see if we can get this to connect again. And then there is a question about the previous config API demo about how do we know if a device or a driver supports automatic tag generation. So specifically, the question is about Modbus Ethernet from Celso. Modbus Ethernet does not support automatic tag generation, like I showed you with Allen Bradley, and with Backnet, you cannot do that with our Modbus Ethernet driver. If you're wondering what specific drivers or devices support automatic tag generation, you can just reference our help files or go on the web and you can look at what options are supported for the specific driver on our product pages. Okay, so good question there. All right. So for whatever reason, it is not letting me connect right now, unfortunately. But I'll just go through. It's a pretty simple concept here, where the fact is, like, I can push this out to edge, that would load just like I showed you with the config API earlier. If I tried to push this bad load JSON file out, it would fail. It wouldn't load in. And then if I did, let's say, like a bigger file, so import this file, you'll see that the file size here, it ticked up as it was loading. So if I had a really big file here, it would slowly import that over time, and you would see this file size increase as that was importing. So pretty straightforward there. And then the one other thing to note is that once I have these files loaded into my platform, it's just like a file system is just showing me what different files are available. That's available for any industrial connection, any KEPServer connection. So if I click over to my local VM and go to the configuration files there, those same 3 files that I imported for the main host are available here as well. So basically you can templatize your project config and then push them out via different connections to your different installs, different KEPServerEX installs. Okay, great. So any questions on any of that? We're pretty good on time here, and I've basically reached the end of what I was planning on presenting as far as the demo and the functionality. So if anybody has a question, that's great. Okay, Irene, can I load a project from a Thingworks service? Yes, so let's look at the services here. So basically this configuration files option here is what we've created as the UI and as the option if you don't want to develop or engage that service manually yourself. But like I said, we do have new services. There's the cancel, push and pull, and then pull config from edge and push config from edge. And both of those are services that you can engage yourself and use in your Thingworks projects without having to, so if you're creating a mashup, you're creating your own UI without having to go through the UI we've pre-built for you. So both of those are options, is doing it from a service, which is obviously the services that are used in this configuration file view. And that's a great point. You can also, I believe there's some new properties and alerts that are associated with those services as well. So yeah, configuration pull status, configuration push status. So that's status info that we're using to generate the error messages that you saw in the configuration files UI. And that you can also pull into your own mashups and so on and so forth. Okay. All right, I think that's all for questions. Oh, nope. I got another question coming in here. So is there any web tutorial of how to use Thingworks, or is that that's separate from Maximo? Yeah. So there are actually lots of web tutorials on how to use Thingworks, and I'm happy you asked. That's almost feels like a planted question because it's I have such a good answer for you. So if you go to iotu.com, this is IoT University is maintained and created by PTC and Thingworks educators, very savvy people, and it's free. You can log in, create a login, register for free, nothing special there. And if you look at their catalog, there's tons of courses, very beautifully designed. This is actually what I use to train myself on using Thingworks. So all the demos you may have seen me do in the past, or mashups that I've done myself, I learned how to do that by taking this Fundamentals of IoT Development with Thingworks. So really great course. It gives you access to a cloud-based version of Thingworks, which allows you to create your own mashups and experiments with Thingworks on your own, so you don't have to have it downloaded to your own system or anything like that. So I definitely recommend this Fundamentals of IoT Development. Just go to iotu.com, and again, free in order to use that and to do that course. And then they also have a bunch of other courses up here, stuff around just in general IoT and Internet of Things, but then they have kind of the next level after the fundamentals is IoT modeling with Thingworks. So great courses available there. Another question, do I need a special license to use Kepware with Thingworks? You do not need a special license on the Kepware side. So for KEPServerEX, that native Thingworks connection that I showed you that's available in project properties, that any driver you purchase, let's say you get the manufacturing suite or the Modbus suite or something like that, this Thingworks interface is packaged with the server for free. So in addition to whatever licenses you're purchasing, it just packaged with it. So you can get this functionality, this always on connection, at no extra charge. On the Thingworks side, there's different pricing models, and I'm not the person to ask. But if you are interested in getting started with Thingworks and potentially purchasing the Thingworks platform, just email sales@kepware.com and we'll get you connected to the right people to do that. Really great questions. All right. Do we have a demo data set for Kepware that's coming from Kishore? That's also a great question. So I will show you, with all clean installs of KEPServerEX, something comes with that install called semdemo.opf. And that's available if you look at your program data folder. I believe it's program data. No, you know what? It's actually the program files. Program files x86, Kepware, KEPServerEX 6, projects. It's going to be located in that folder, so you can access it there. Again, all installs of KEPServerEX gets this, and it comes with 3 pre-set up channels that are using our simulator driver. What our simulator driver does is just act as an 8-bit or 16-bit device, so an 8-bit or 16-bit PLC, but instead of being actually physically connected to a device out on the network, it's just using what we call server cache, which is just computer RAM, computer memory, to simulate an 8-bit or 16-bit register. And it also comes with built-in functions, ramp, random, sign, user, so you can create algorithms and algorithmic data that you can get from any connected client. So if I open my quick client here, for example, and I look at these functions here, you see that I have data changing because of those different functions that I'm using the simulator driver. So lots of documentation in the help file how to use that. Specifically, if you're using Kepware with Thingworks, there's something called the Thingworks Manufacturing Apps. So if you just go to the Thingworks Manufacturing App portal, there's a demo set associated with using the apps, which we've talked about in other webinars, and you can use that demo set as well. Okay, great. So it does look like the questions have slowed down here, so I'm just going to wrap up. Training requests. We are wrapping up our training classes for October. We had to open up another one because our first one in October got full. And then we won't be starting classes again until next March. So if you do want to come for an in-person class, that's available through that request form, and you can check out our 2018 dates that are available now. Again, we have YouTube page. We also have a video page on our website where you can access any demos or anything that I've referenced here in this webinar for more information. Keep up to date. We do have a LinkedIn page for training that we update as well with upcoming webinars and information as well. And of course, you can always contact sales@kepware.com if you're interested in trying out Kepware, trying out Thingworks, or anything like that. Training@kepware.com if you have questions for me specifically or for our training group, and then obviously technical support and so on. So thank you so much for joining. We will send out the recording for this webinar after this call is wrapped up in a couple days, and the PDF of the slides. So thank you for joining, and I look forward to speaking with you for our next release in a few months. All right, bye-bye.